I think just a small thought I had when Dina was explaining that, which I thought was really interesting and really clear, was that like one of the things that we encounter, particularly, I mean, I did a panel like 2 weeks ago, and it was with young people, and one of the questions that was asked was, do you think that the points-based system is going to help refugees? And you can see within that the way that UK politics particularly has conflated migration and refugees to a point whereby this group of young people thought that that would be something that would affect people with refugee status or people who are fleeing war, for example, rather than, I think that basically the way that the conflation between refugee and migration issues has been brought together has been very successful to big detriment, basically. And I think it's important to be thinking about that critically anyway. But yeah, as you were saying, with the population, the people that we work with people at the US-Mexico border and in Central America, and that is one of the places that we work whereby people are more directly talking about environmental reasons being causal to the reasons that they moved, that they had to leave, essentially. And other countries that's linked to land, linked to people, like linked to drought, linked to the drought leading to secondary issues as well. So you have that direct and that causal link there. Other projects that we work in, it's very, very difficult to say. Like I worked in France myself for 3 years, and met people from Eritrea, Ethiopia, Iran, Afghanistan, Kurdistan, a hell of a lot of other places as well. And I never met anyone who who expressed the reason that they had left was to do with climate change. And I think it's one of those things that it's one of those things to be thinking about, essentially, that like it's very often like either secondary. For example, like I know there's been research done around the situation with Syrian refugees in 2015, and suggestion that like the droughts preceding the civil war in Syria were causal to a lot of people being in cities, which was then causal to violence, which was then causal to resistance, which then led to the repression, basically, by the Assad government. So it feels as though I've had a lot of conversations with people throughout my time working in that, and very few people have directly said that that's a reason. So I suppose it's about it's about not wanting to ascribe that reason to someone and listening to the reason that they left directly, and then also thinking about the secondary causes and things around that. So it's difficult, I think, especially within like my experience, which is the UK border and sort of EU context.
Yeah, I'll just bring Amy in quickly, if you wanted to talk a little bit about what you've researched in terms of like the actual term climate refugee and how it's talked about at the moment.
Quickly jump in and just talk about the language, the semantic. Big link there with, if we think about climate crisis versus climate change, and how typical narratives of the climate crisis kind of project the climate crisis far off into the future. And I think that kind of conceptual distancing actually permeates policy making. And so the fact that, okay, we can talk about how you might want to categorize or identify climate refugees versus climate migrant, or something perhaps more empowering. But I think the fact that they're yet to be recognized under international law perhaps reflects a broader sort of desire to kind of ignore the reality. And the problem is that communities in the global south are already experiencing the impacts of climate change. And because of this lack of provision for them within international law, nobody's actually acknowledging that the climate crisis is a reality for them. And this is a big factor for why they're having to flee their homes. So they're not party or, privileged to the benefits of what you can get from becoming an asylum seeker or a refugee, because no one wants to confront the fact that the climate crisis is happening right now. And I think there's a big link there in terms of how we view the climate crisis and how we view these people.
I was just wondering, Alexa, next, whether you could maybe talk about like the intersections that you've experienced from sort of working in SolidariTee that connect to other issues, because obviously like the climate crisis affects people in terms of like gender and like class and race, and there's also issues of like colonialism. So I was just wondering like what current issues are specific refugees facing and the intersections between them.
So I thought it was really interesting what Amy said, and I think it's a really relevant point to make, that if you don't have the legal language to recognise someone as a refugee, that's just not an option in people's minds or in the sort of societal psyche at all. So as Josh was saying, it's not, the concept of a climate refugee is not something that we ever really come across. That being said, like we talked about internally displaced people, and often reasons why someone might not be able to cross a border, which is kind of the trigger for becoming eligible to apply for asylum status. You're not crossing an international border, and that could well be due to a lack of resources. So I think if you come from somewhere where you have been affected by climate change really severely, that's going to impact on your ability to even seek refugee status for reasons of conflict or other things. And in terms of your more specific question about intersectionality, I mean, we've definitely seen like female refugees have far higher rates of sexual and gender-based violence, as do members of the LGBT community. So I think in general, there are lots of compounding issues, and also unfortunately within one's own culture, within one's own community, when living in a refugee camp or even moving out of that camp into a host country, unfortunately lots of those issues of homophobia and of racism continue to follow people around, because they're also issues in host nations.
Yeah, definitely. We're about to start a campaign with Refugees in Colour, who's a LGBT group in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya at the moment. So there's lots of major issues that refugees aren't currently been talking about. I was just wondering whether, Dina, you could talk about a little bit what we can actually do as people like in the UK and in European countries to raise more awareness of refugees and make a difference.
I want, before saying this, just to come back to this climate refugee, because I really think we have to be extremely careful with that and what we wish for, because it's very difficult, as Josh also mentioned, to isolate the environmental drivers, and even more difficult to isolate to say it's due to climate change. So I'm worried that if we just focus on the idea we need a climate refugee state, we went up by and some will be able to showcase maybe that the certification of sea level rise is the key area, like the key reason for their moving. But in many other cases, you see people, they lost their jobs and they can't even showcase that it's due maybe to a change in rainfall patterns. So it's so difficult that I really think we have to also look in better overall migration policies and development policies, of course. So you have a lot of this migration that's internal. So it's not even a discussion about going beyond the borders, and it's also the responsibility of the country of origin to take care of these people. So I would not also just drop that. I really think that the countries of origin in the global south have major responsibilities, and even if they are in the context of the climate crisis and the responsibility of the north, I really think the South has also some responsibilities to raise up to, and working with states and with government, I see this all the time. They sometimes go for the lowest key denominator, and it's not just the North, it's also the South. So it's a very difficult conversation. And working in IOM for all these years, and I also produced this atlas of environmental migration. We debated a lot how to call it. And we decided to call it environmental migration, so that we include also disasters due to natural disaster and sudden onset and climate change related issues. So I think, yeah, I would like to say this because I find it's something that sounds positive, but it's not necessarily so easy and might have negative impact on people because it's such a complicated legal domain. And that doesn't mean people don't need protection and assistance. I think we have to be very innovative and look into humanitarian law, in development law, in environmental law, in international migration law to support and give protection to people. And then coming to the level of individuals, I think I also work with states and governments, so I also believe that policymakers are people. and individuals. And I never forget this because I think we are a tendency to also, nothing to do with these people. But no, they are, when you talk to them, you have real people. And some are super committed and some are like not at all. So I think for me, my work is to support also these people to change their mind. And then at the level of each individual, I think, of course, there are all the work at communication, campaign, evidence, stories, that bring the reality of people to the people. I think these are key, but not in a victimizing way. I think from what I get from all people I work with, they don't want necessarily to move. They don't necessarily want to become refugees. They want to be seen as positive also actors of the fight against climate change. So one of the things I really believe in is also us working with migrants, with refugees, with returnees, with diasporas for climate action. So I'm looking, for instance, in supporting diaspora, more investment in action and climate in their own countries back home. And for people in the UK, I think it's, again, you are right. For me, it's empathy, compassion that comes to knowing people, in fact, being exposed to it. If you are not exposed, you don't really understand it. So as much as possible, bringing the realities in a positive way, and not victimizing the migrants and not saying also, oh, you racist, go away. And no, I don't think that works. We have to be able to provide evidence, facts, and stories and human compassion, and it maybe will advance. I hope, I'm very optimistic in my life. I try to think, I think humanity does the worst, but also the best. So let's focus on the best and try to cope with the worst, which I have difficulties to cope with. Sometimes I don't understand how it's possible, but it's possible. So yes, I gave you a mix of, I think, what I really sincerely think, and also what's the situation, a reality check at policy level, because that's we have to change things, but we have to understand very well what are the things and what limitations we have in the north and in the south. So yeah. I hope it's, I stop here.
That's great. Thanks so much. I was just wondering whether you could talk a little bit about what could specifically do in terms of working with refugees and how you as a charity engage people in these issues.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So I suppose the ways that people can help with us directly is like number one is always just being informed by it. I think educating around this, and a lot of the language at the moment, I feel like a lot of people are pausing and educating themselves while being active, which is really great to see in everything like Black Lives Matter to other causes. So like if you wanna follow us and follow all of the partner organizations that we support. So there's like if you're following us on social media and you're following a lot of our partner organizations, you'd have direct information from like really like a lot of the like basically borders from the US, Mexico, all the way over to the Greek islands and to the Middle East. So you'd be getting a decent picture of what's happening there and hearing the voices of groups, whereby those groups are led by people people who are living that experience as well. I think like you can listen to me talk about this, or like much better listen to the people who are actually there, who are building their own community groups to be able to build community resilience and survive through the onslaught of very, very like oppressive policy, as was mentioned. Like I think like as well, like what we do is we sort of help and support groups to be able to build like community resilience essentially. So if a group is coming together to volunteer, so whether it be on an issue, so an LGBTQ plus shelter in Tijuana, or like a group in the UK that's supporting people who don't have the right to work because they're in the asylum process or who are destitute, or people who are in the Moria camp in Lesbos, who are coming together to try and build that resilience, essentially. So we just provide capacity and support for them to be able to do what they do best, and at the same time try and be as loud as we can and fight for change on this, with using the stories and the information that those people can give, and trying to open those conversations with people who are in positions of power and authority in terms of policy. But it's a very uphill battle, as I'm sure anyone who's working in activism right now, to do with something that is based on compassion. We have an uphill battle, but there are times, there's things to fight with there. And I think it's a good thing that anyone can do, is just look to the local level, look to people who are doing stuff, look to people who understand the situation better than you do, maybe, or and just try and support them doing what they're doing, play a supportive role. Community resilience is always good.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much. There's so much there. So definitely, we've posted on our Instagram, everyone from the panel, so you can find out more information and follow them from there. Alexa, do you want to talk a little bit about, so SolidariTee is particularly like sustainable in terms of like its production of its t-shirts. Do you want to talk about like what the individual we can do to almost like use our purchasing power and our activist social media to make a difference?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to be honest, what you just said is very much like exactly our ethos. I suppose it's worth mentioning that the reason that we've chosen to focus on legal aid with the money that we've raised is because we really believe that that's the key, especially in Europe, which is where we focus, that actually the refugee crisis doesn't have to be a crisis. You know, we're hearing reports of people waiting until 2026, people now that are arriving in Greece, until 2026 for their asylum interview. And that's what will determine whether that person will be granted asylum status, refugee status, and be able to actually go live their life positively in their new country. And without legal aid to both facilitate those interviews and to support the preparation, because it's a complex process, there's just no hope for the camps ever becoming decongested and so on. So in terms of the individual, obviously we think that putting your money towards sustainable forms of support is a way that we can help. We sell our custom-made t-shirts or SolidariTees, and I think not only the reason that we like our t-shirts is because they're also a really visual display. They're a conversation starter and they can act as outreach in their own right. In terms of people using their purchasing power, I think it's just, well, for me anyway, I found it's important to look at what the ramifications will be of anything that I purchase. I'm not saying that you have to buy everything you ever purchase from charity, but there are always negative ramifications from fast fashion and things like that that will contribute to other societal issues.
Yeah, definitely. And I was just wondering whether we could bring in Amy as well to talk a little bit about like creativity and creating that personal, emotional connection with refugees on the ground, in terms of us actually being able to make the emotional connection to then make a difference, rather than just statistics and facts that we're currently seeing.
Well, I think that's exactly it. I think, earlier this week we did an Instagram Live with Migrate, kind of empowering initiative where they get in the UK to do cooking classes from their country of origin. They share their recipes. And I kind of said that their work is really empowering because it humanizes the refugee crisis. Because when you see headlines about refugee crisis, it kind of demonizes them, it dehumanizes it, because it's just this mass group of people that you have no connection with. And I think it's about remembering that each and every one of those refugees, or those waiting to get refugee status, is exactly like one of us. They're human. And so with Louder Than the Storm and our creative aspect, what we're trying to do is kind of humanize the climate crisis and foster a connection with the natural world. And I think that's also possible within the context of the refugee crisis. We can, like SolidariTee has, I think it was a Sudanese artist designed the t-shirts this year, and that was showcasing her art, and that was kind of inspired directly by her experiences, if I'm correct, Lexi.
Yeah, we also had, this year we actually had, our most recent designs were from a refugee from Afghanistan, a calligrapher who currently lives in Moria. But we've had designs by a Sudanese artist also. It's interesting what you've mentioned about kind of humanizing the crisis, and I think it's worth especially when talking about refugees and asylum seekers, remembering that a refugee needs neither to be the perfect, wonderful member of society or to be a villain that is a drain. Actually, we can just be really normal people who lose their patience, maybe have special talents, maybe don't, but that doesn't mean you're not deserving of protection.
Yeah,
Sure.
Do you mind? Also, I just wondered if I could jump in there. I think that's a really, really good point. And I noticed actually today, I don't know if anyone saw, but Vince Cable wrote an article for The Independent that was talking about this very thing. And it was focused on, I think it was well-meaning. And I think it was basically saying that there's a demographic opportunity for Western and Northern Hemisphere, like rich countries, with migration, basically, particularly with climate migration. And I just think that that's it's a very tempting way to go down, especially when, I mean, cards on the table, we're just getting battered left, right, and centre, aren't we, as people who are trying to advocate for this based on where we are politically. And I can imagine it being a very tempting thing, but there's just that thing of just like, why does there have to be that? Why can't it be the centre of this, be individual compassion or someone being safe? Why does there have to be this like opportunity? And I feel like I don't know. It's something that framing wise we need to think about. I would still not, you know, maybe that's still a positive influence on, and maybe it will help people. I don't know, but I feel like it's at least something to think about in terms of how we frame the conversation going forward. It often comes through as an economic thing as well. Like, you know, there are doctors among these people, you know, there are builders. Why can't they come here and help build the economy or something like that? And I get that. It does work in some ways, but it's something to think about.
If that does something to shift, if someone had a wholly negative attitude and hearing positive stories has done something to shift their kind of reference point, I think that's not a bad thing. I just think there's a danger of heading towards a narrative that we're only offering international protection because we want people that are going to contribute to the economy, and that's quite a dangerous narrative.
I had an interesting conversation on a message boardy thing where it was like a local group, and they were talking about the deportation of someone, and they were sort of saying, this is a local guy, he's worked as a hospital cleaner for all these years, and so there's a petition, and someone put like, we didn't want to get rid of people like him, we wanted to get rid of the illegals. And the point was that the Home Office was making this man illegal. Like, but the person who had responded to this didn't consider them, I assume, didn't consider themselves to be a racist, and didn't want people like him to go because he wasn't illegal, but without the recognition that that's exactly what this was doing. This was making this person illegal. And like, I don't know, it just really made it interesting to me that is where someone could draw a cognitive dissonance there or draw a line and not realise what exactly they're advocating. And I feel like maybe that's the point of the illegals and the argument where that can sometimes lead, where that argument about utility can sometimes lead.
Can I just add something also from my perspective? First of all, I just want to say that I think that speaking through art, it's a key tool for this topic. And we have, over the past years, I worked on quite a few different also initiatives, also with kids. I think that kids to work with kids, but also artists, I think painters and also a lot of contemporary art. And the last climate conference we made with the coalition from France, prize for artists. I don't know if you know this. I will send you a link if you don't know already. So that's one thing I really believe in this very strongly, because it's about emotions rather than statistics. At the same time, we really need facts and statistics, and it's wonderful that some people also love statistics, so they can help with this. Okay, we let them do that. And then the other thing I wanted to tell you, the more I work in these discussions, and I met people from the Caribbean, from the Pacific, from Sahel, from Western Africa, what comes a lot also from the research of IOM is also that sometimes we do have a very northern and western perspective on this, and that we miss the fact that a lot of people just don't want to leave. And I think that's why a lot of the work of IOM now is either about protection of people who have to move because of the climate change, either about pushing a bit more innovation at migration level so that we think of removement protocols, urban migration, visas in a more proactive way for these people. or partnerships really with the environmental and climate people. So it's about really investing in nature-based solutions, this ecosystem rehabilitation in land, in water, ocean. It's very much where IOM works in partnership with people who actually work on the environment, so that people do not have to move. And I'm very attached to that, because I really think sometimes we are so obsessed with what our compatriots in the north are not giving, and issues of protection. And of course, we should look at this, but we should not forget that a lot of the people, they would prefer just to stay. They don't want to change countries. Why would they lose absolutely everything? So there's a whole reality of this discussion that is about allowing people to stay, and there's no shame about it. There's no hidden agenda that it's not about us willing to have them here. I really believe there's a real agenda about being serious about the environment so that people can stay in their homes. So that's another bit, and I really wanted to mention that, because I find it's not either or in a way. It's a wide range of policies, and the main ones are about development and poverty at the end of the day. And then we have this whole bunch of policies around migration policies, and we have a whole bunch around climate and environmental issues, and then we have an underlying human approach and arts and communication that connects more to the reality of each individual. But when you work in a big organization, you need to be aware of the legal issues. You need to be able to talk either like a technocrat, either as a statistician, or like an artist, or like a poet, or like a humanitarian. You have to be able to adapt what you are saying as key messages to different audiences if you want if you believe in a bigger scale change. So I really believe in this, and I'm not ashamed to talk also technocratically when needed. But I always try to say, hey, technocrats, we are people. So let's talk about little, Irina from Moldova. Let's talk about Hala from Maldives. Let's come back to this so that you can also connect a bit more to what we have the statistics. Yeah, thanks for having given me again the floor.
Thanks so much. Just wondering whether Josh and Alexa want to give final thoughts before we close off this session as well. So maybe Alexa, if you want to go first, if you have anything more you wanted to say.
To be honest, I just want to say thank you, because really this has been a very interesting discussion for me also. In terms of information, if anyone on here is interested about SolidariTee, we have teams at currently 42 unis and counting. So we're really thrilled to have volunteers who are interested in getting involved on campus, but also if you're not a current student, there are lots of ways to get involved. And as Josh said, I think if nothing else, maybe just taking 5 minutes after this to have a little Google. If everyone did that, we'd be so much further forward than we are now.
That's great. Thanks so much for coming on. It's been such a pleasure listening to. Josh, do you have any final thoughts or anything else you wanted to suggest?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to repeat that as well. And I'd really love to hear more about SolidariTee as well. It sounds absolutely great. It sounds like a great project.
Likewise.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks very much. I think I've had a really, really interesting discussion and learned a lot as well. Thank you very much to you all. And yeah, I think again, it's one of those things that I'm reading a lot about. What I really liked about Louder Than the Storm's website, which I was looking at earlier, and this conversation, is I'm hearing a lot of conversation. It feels like most people in the sector, or most people who are reading about this sort of stuff, know that there is an intersection between the climate crisis and between people who are going to have to, people who are already having to move and things getting worse. But it feels like that's where it stops. It feels like everyone's aware of this, and then there isn't much more discussion that goes into it. And I think that's partly because it's so complicated, and partly because, as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the reasons I find difficult is that very few people themselves actually express that as a direct reason. So I think that just having loads more conversations about it and trying to create more space for this conversation is just such a good thing. Maybe it's early days for this conversation. I feel like Oh yeah, I was going to also plug an amazing book that I just read called The Next Great Migration by Sonia Shah. Has anyone read that? It's just my absolute Bible for the last couple of weeks. Honestly, it's so good. And I just think it really good at like reframing that conversation and just thinking about it in a slightly different way, as well as really going into the discussions of where anti-migration comes from, and a little bit, for me, doing a bit of research on where anti-migration sort of philosophically and scientifically begins is a really interesting place to start. And like, if I was more read up on it and more strongly researched on this, I probably could have spoke about that. But instead, I will just make a recommendation to a very good author. And yeah, thanks loads.
Yeah, that's all right. Thanks very much. Just checking, Dina, did you have any last thoughts or comments you wanted to say before we finalise?
Yes, thanks. I can share a few resources if you haven't seen yet. Also, our Atlas of Environmental Migration, that was a huge investment and work from our side to try to explain what we know or don't know about the topic. So I don't know if you are aware of this book. This year it will be in Japanese, so I'm very proud. Yeah. And the last thing I want to say is that I think it's great to see and your ideas and that you are doing stuff. I mean, that's just amazing. I want to congratulate. I feel very grateful that I had the opportunity to discuss with you. I really hope we can stay in touch, because I can also bring you in different, more like when we do the climate conferences. I'm sitting on the task force on displacement under the Convention on Climate Change. So there are some of these entry points where this discussion is being really taken over and seriously debated. So I feel also we are totally different time than 10 years ago in terms of awareness. And just to tell you why it's also so difficult, it's not just politically, it's just also the money. I'm in my function fundraising all the time, and it's very difficult to fundraise. And yes, I want to congratulate you, and I feel grateful that me reaching almost 50-year-old, I can talk to dynamic network, and it gives me like really hope and believe that yes, people take their lives and want to do things. And so I say bravo once again.
Right, thanks.
I stop here. Thank you. I mute.
So thanks so much everyone for coming. If you do want to get more involved, you can find us on social media or at the Louder Than the Storm website. We're always looking for more volunteers in our roles, and also feel free to get in contact with any of our panelists as well. We hope we'll see you all soon at a next event or something else we'll be running.
Thanks so much for having us, and thanks for organising.